A user enters the right password, approves multi-factor authentication, and reaches the application. Minutes later, an unfamiliar device appears inside the same account without another login prompt. The attacker did not defeat the sign-in. Malware on the endpoint copied the session that sign-in created. In this CipherVibe lesson, we will trace a fictional browser session from authentication to suspicious reuse, then apply endpoint and server-side defenses. The lab never accesses a browser profile, cookie database, memory, password, token, account, or network service. Every event and identifier is invented. After authentication, a service usually creates session state and gives the browser an identifier, often through a cookie. The browser presents that identifier on later requests, so the user does not repeat the password and multi-factor step on every page. Until expiration or invalidation, that identifier can represent authenticated access. An Infostealer is malware designed to collect valuable information from a compromised device. Depending on the family and environment, targets may include browser data, stored credentials, session material, autofill data, wallets, files, and system context. The exact capabilities vary, so incident response must validate evidence rather than assume one fixed behavior. Multi-factor authentication still protects the login event. The problem is temporal. The browser session is issued after MFA succeeds. If a service accepts a copied bearer session without additional proof, the attacker may not see another MFA challenge until risk controls, expiration, reauthentication, or revocation intervene. Our lab uses a fictional user named Riley and an opaque label called Session A. It contains states for issued, active, copied, reused, challenged, and revoked. No secret value exists behind the label. The simulator cannot inspect a browser, read a file, access memory, transmit data, or connect to an application. The normal timeline starts after a successful fictional sign-in. Session A remains associated with a known device context, expected location, and normal activity. These signals are not permanent identity proofs, but together they provide a baseline for detecting a material change later. When the compromised toggle is selected, the simulator creates a second label called Session A copy and raises a synthetic endpoint alert. That is the entire demonstration. It does not reproduce infection, persistence, evasion, credential access, decryption, browser storage access, or exfiltration. The copied label appears from a fictional untrusted device and network with no corresponding authentication event. It immediately attempts a recovery change and data export. The strongest signal is not simply a new IP address, it is the conflict among session continuity, device context, authentication history, and sensitive behavior. MITRE highlights suspicious access to browser session storage or browser process memory as endpoint evidence, and token reuse from unusual clients or locations as identity evidence. Join endpoint, identity provider, application, and network telemetry so a device compromise can trigger session investigation before account abuse expands. Applications should use secure session cookies with appropriate secure, HTTP only, same site, scope, and lifetime settings. These controls reduce network, script, cross-site, and persistence risks. They are essential, but they are not a complete defense against malware already running with access to the user environment. OWASP advises against storing authentication tokens, session identifiers, or refresh tokens in local storage or session storage because JavaScript executing in the origin can access them. Prefer appropriately protected HTTP-only cookies or a backend for front-end design, and keep sensitive client-side state minimal. Use server-enforced idle and absolute timeouts, renew session identifiers at meaningful transitions, and require recent strong authentication for sensitive actions. Shorter validity reduces the opportunity for misuse, while risk-based reauthentication can interrupt a copied session when context or behavior changes. The most direct defense is preventing endpoint compromise. Keep the operating system, browser, extensions, password manager, and security tooling updated. Restrict untrusted software and risky downloads, limit unnecessary extensions, use endpoint protection, and investigate detections that indicate browser data or process access. When an Infostealer is suspected, isolate and investigate the device, then use a known clean device to revoke active sessions and tokens. Change compromised credentials, remove unknown authenticators and recovery methods, and review application-specific persistence. A password change alone does not always invalidate every existing session. Infostealers may collect more than session material. Inventory accounts and applications used on the device. Prioritize primary email, cloud, financial, employer, password manager, and wallet access, and review recent actions. Preserve endpoint and identity evidence before rebuilding so responders can determine scope and notify affected parties. We rerun the fictional timeline with controls enabled. The endpoint alert raises identity risk, the copied context conflicts with the original session, and the sensitive action requires fresh, strong proof. The service denies the action and revokes the related session family while the responder contains the device. Run a tabletop or approved staging exercise using opaque labels and synthetic accounts. Measure how quickly endpoint evidence reaches identity controls, whether users can view and revoke sessions, how high-risk actions trigger reauthentication, and whether response teams can contain the device and account without handling real session secrets. The lasting lesson is that strong authentication creates a session. It does not permanently prove every later request. Protect the endpoint that holds the session. Design sessions with limited lifetime and contextual checks, require fresh proof for sensitive actions, and make revocation fast. Find the full defensive checklist on CipherVibe.